Hey guys, what's up? It's Trent here doing a surprise review. I was initially going to do this review next year, however I thought it'd end 2013 with a bang, and the way I'm going out is doing a review for Silent Hill Downpour, developed by Vatra Games, published by Konami. So the way it works is, for new subscribers who don't know, I review games in the spirit and very much in which they're given in, and I believe in reviewing a game fairly. I don't focus entirely on the negatives, and with Downpour, I actually had to go back and revisit the game. I like doing this as it really jump-starts the experience for me. I haven't played it in like a year and a half, so doing another playthrough really benefited me personally in wrapping up my thoughts for this game. And I've got a lot to discuss about this game, good and bad, but hopefully I can make this review simple, clean and fair. So with that being said, let's get this review started. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with how I review games, I start off with story first. And the story focuses mainly on Murphy Pendleton, who is a prison convict who is awaiting transfer to another penitentiary. And he is aboard a prison transfer bus where it miraculously swerves off course, landing just outside of the town of Silent Hill. And here is where the hell really drags him in. So Murphy seizes his opportunity to make a run for it almost immediately, but ends up caught in the deadly web of psychological terror that is the town of Silent Hill. The story has some really good moments and some fairly poor moments as well, but let's focus on the positives firstly. Where the narrative shines, I feel, is when it focuses on the all-familiar Silent Hill lore, I like to call it. And when I say that, I mean it's when the town starts to reflect on its visitors' inner fears and anxieties. Murphy adapts accordingly and realistically in these situations, and it subsequently adds some much needed intrigue and depth to the story. When you reach the halfway mark in the game, the story throws a couple of curveballs at you, which actually caught me off guard on several occasions. Murphy's true motivations and actions are much more understandable in these instances, and it sheds light on a common subject matter that even the most vile and unrequited person can still redeem themselves through their own actions and choices. But now, on to the bad. Sad face. What almost insulted me, however, was the over-reliance of horror cliches such as the "Did you just see that? I just saw something by the window." Typical scenarios and generic boo scares seen in almost every single Western horror film out there. I thought the story would have been just fine without them. This was the perfect opportunity for the developers to think out of the box and to be truly ingenious. It would have added some much needed relief to this dying genre. But I understand that this is a somewhat huge demand to make, and Downpour shouldn't be expected to carry this heavy cross. When the game steers away from said plot devices, however, there are actually rare moments where the narrative actually permeates throughout the gloomy mist, and the theme of one man's redemption are finally able to surface. It's definitely not the best, nor the worst I've seen in the more recent Silent Hill games. The team at Vatra actually attempted to restore the once artistic and ingenious series to its former glory, but still doesn't quite mirror this success. Collectively, I would say that the story was overly saturated with cliche themes and plot devices, but gladly the game does offer small microbursts of imagination and creativity, but it still falls short of reaching its full potential, I feel. So it might sound like I am hating on the story. I actually don't. The story actually caught me by surprise at certain times. I went into this game expecting a very subpar story, and quite the contrary. It's actually the polar opposite of how I felt. There are actually some really good, ingenious and clever and witty moments in the story, but still, survival horror, I feel, has grown so much over time that it really shouldn't need to rely on horror cliches anymore, and that's exactly where the problem was, as I found this game to be quite cliched in the story department. But with that being said, the story isn't too bad, and I also feel that Downpour will be a very good introduction for new players who are wanting to start on this series and don't want to play the older titles. I would love recommending for you guys to play the older titles. If you haven't, that's where the magic is. But if you want to start on the series, I think Downpour will be a very good introduction for you, as the story isn't too deep, it's easy to come to grips with, and it can be somewhat surprising at certain intervals, at least I think anyway. So the character cast in Downpour, I noticed pretty clearly on that it's a rather small character cast, but again, like I said in my Bioshock Infinite review, it's a good thing because it really allows the developers to really hone in and flesh out its main ensemble. And for the most part, I really want to talk about Murphy, as I feel he offers the most ambiguity out of all the characters and is definitely the most interesting. With that being said, I do have some gripes with some of the characters, so let's talk about Murphy first and foremost. Murphy piqued my interest from the get-go almost immediately. I've always wondered what thoughts ran through an inmate's head and what led to them doing such horrible deeds, and ultimately how they find solace and escapism. I actually found Murphy to be a very interesting character, and I rather enjoyed my time guiding him through Silent Hill. What I found most intriguing about him was that you never quite knew what he was thinking, and he almost tends to talk and mutter a lot under his breath, which adds a mystique to his character. The scene with him and the omnipresent postman Howard in particular really stood out to me. I love how detached he seemed in this scene, and it actually showed very typical human reactions, or how someone would react in this situation. This small hint of realism, this sliver of common human psychology, are things that I really appreciate finding in a video game. Murphy's journey throughout the game shapes him realistically as a person, and his feelings of guilt and obligation changes him accordingly. I will say though that the multitude of endings felt a little bit too lackluster and almost done his character a disservice. Anne Cunningham is also another character which I had an immediate reaction to, but in a very different way opposed to Murphy. How do we say it? This woman is a complete bitch! She has nothing but disdain and hate for Murphy, and it actually just got to the point where I couldn't wait for her to fall off the side of the cliff face and die. Her motivations are somewhat reprieved, however, throughout the game, but I still straight up hated this woman. Other secondary characters are fairly unremarkable for the most part and don't really bear too much mentioning. And finally, the voice acting was pretty average for the most part, but Murphy's voice actor, David Boyd Conrad, delivered a very understated yet brilliant performance. So full marks go to Murphy's voice actor. So yeah, this is a bit of deja vu. I am rather split over the characters within Downpour. On the one hand, I am intrigued. I really wanted to learn more about Murphy and how he was able to process all of his thoughts, and I just wanted to know what led to him doing what he did, or what got him in that situation. But on the other hand, secondary characters felt generic and one-dimensional and almost done the game a major disservice. Still, it wasn't too bad. The characters within Downpour weren't too bad at all. Downpour is probably the second game since Remember Me where I felt quite torn about the gameplay. On the one hand, I really love the nostalgia of the gameplay, but on the other, it feels so basic, unyielding and primitive that I almost found it glaring and jarring. Sad face. I liked how survival horror elements were kept in check in this installment and brings back the feeling of nostalgia. Elements include finding random objects and doodads to use as weapons, such as monkey wrenches and lumps of concrete. I also like the odd, out-of-place puzzles. I secretly really love puzzles like that. And the sense of exploration of combing through a deserted ghost town and combining objects together through your inventory. Sadly, however, this is somewhat eroded by some fairly uninspired combat mechanics. Fighting is an arduous affair, pure and simple. Enemy AI is rather aggressive, and poor old Murphy looks like a crazy man doing the windmill with an iron pipe or other such weaponry. It feels so basic and flat that I wanted to avoid combat in most situations. Okay, it's honestly not as bad as I'm making it sound like, but a little polish would have gone a long way, I feel. On the subject of AI, monster design felt severely lacking, as opposed to older titles in the Silent Hill universe, and didn't really offer anything new in terms of creativity. I almost found them quite amusing for the most part. And another interesting feature was the option to make moral decisions which are scattered throughout the game at regular intervals. It actually fitted the game rather well, I thought, and its execution, sure, it could have been a little bit more refined, but I like this sort of experimentation in a game. It makes you feel involved in the narrative in subtle ways. Navigation throughout the town of Silent Hill has come full circle, I believe. and there are almost no invisible walls in this game, which can lead to you doing a lot of exploration, and trust me, it will unleash your inner pack rat. Sadly, the enemies who interrupt you at every twist and turn down a desolate street makes this less enjoyable than it needs to be. Frame rates were also a pretty big issue for me. Simply progressing through a door or entering a new area, the game would start auto-saving, which ended in some very painful lapses in the frame rate department, and gameplay and exploration ended up actually being a pain in the ass over time. And finally, the side quests within the game were actually truly genius, I thought. The puzzles and quests were actually very inspired and creative, and had some very surprising twists, and further explains the lives of the once living people within Silent Hill. It's well worth finishing these side quests for the extra depth and sub-stories alone. So the gameplay was a bit of hit and miss for me. I loved certain parts, but at the same time, loathed others. But still, it wasn't a bad play at all. So yeah, gameplay, for the third time, it's had me rather split. I don't know whether or not I loved it or hated it. There's so many parts which I enjoyed. References to old survival horror games of Days of Future Past, and at the same time it can feel very primitive and unyielding. I feel like the gameplay took a step forward but took 2 steps back, which is a shame, but like I said before, it's not a bad play by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just really picky, so excuse my pickiness. Visually, Silent Hill Downpour is hands down the most consistent aspect of this game. The visuals were so beautifully foreboding, and I loved the atmosphere and how dark and dreary and poignant it was. It really brought back the old spirit of the old Silent Hill games. I really appreciate that, like a whole lot. Although this special treatment wasn't given to all aspects of the game for the most part, it is still the most smartly produced and slickest looking Silent Hill title brought out by this development team. I loved how the town of Silent Hill is represented in this game. Everything looks eerily ghostly and worn out, giving the illusion that people actually lived in this town once upon a time. The streets are gutted and barren, with amazing weather sims that come into effect periodically and realistically. The dredges of rain left after a storm give the town a washed out feeling and adds personality to the game, albeit a somewhat dark personality. The otherworld transitions and effects are also a breath of fresh air. Instead of everything just rusting over with metal gates just seemingly appearing out of nowhere, these transitions are much more abstract and varied this time around, with the water theme being a very big inspiration for these scenes. These are some of my most favourite scenes in the entire game, and the strange chase sequences with the weird red blob apparition, I don't know what the hell it was somewhat lacking but enjoyable nonetheless. Facial models weren't too particularly impressive, unfortunately. Some expressions looked so wooden and marionette-like that I almost found it jarring and laughable. The only exception I found here were Murphy's facial models and designs, which were incredibly well done and executed. I wish this treatment was given to all characters, but I still think that this is without a doubt the most consistent aspect of the game. I have read reviews that people think that the visuals of Downpour are quite outdated for the most part, but I honestly didn't have a problem with them. For the most part, some of the secondary characters look like complete moppets, and their mouth will be moving, but no other part of their face will be moving. I found it actually quite enjoyable in a cheesy aspect nonetheless, but still, I truly believe that the visuals is the strongest department within Silent Hill Downpour, without a doubt. The soundtrack for Downpour, I was absolutely terrified when I heard that Akira Yamaoka, longtime composer of the Silent Hill soundtracks, legend and god, was not going to be scoring this soundtrack, and I secretly set myself up for failure. I was just like, I am not going to listen to this soundtrack, it's going to be rubbish, but it's not. Let me explain why. Naturally, I was very worried about who they were going to pick for composer of this score, and I knew this person had really big shoes to fill. Daniel Licht composes the soundtrack, the guy who does the soundtrack for Dexter, and I'm happy to say that I was mildly, actually, very impressed with his work. Daniel managed to capture the spirit of Silent Hill games in his score, while adding in his own signature to the mix with outright mimicking or copying Akira's work. A very difficult task to do, but he somehow pulled it off. It still catches that off-kilter sound of previous scores with the familiar wails and jangling of instrumental streaks and ambiences. My favourite tracks were the Downpour intro song, which has a very distinct, ethereal and moody feel with a very weighty and tingling arrangement. I also love Monastic Tendencies, which has a very oppressive textured layout with subtle and graceful female vocals permeating throughout it. And finally, I would definitely have to pick the Korn theme song, which is admittedly a little self-indulgent, but I really loved it and I thought it fit the bill perfectly. And honestly, I'd be lying if I said that I didn't miss Akira's Midas touch on the score, but really, Daniel Licht done an incredible job here and deserves some major praise and respect for even attempting to take on the soundtrack. You have my thanks, and all I have to say is, job well done, Daniel. So, my summary for Silent Hill Downpour is that I was mildly surprised in some aspects. I like certain parts of the story, I like some of the characters, I like some of the gameplay, I like some of the visuals. At the same time, I am completely on the fence here. I am split down the middle. There are quite a few glaring problems within this game, but it's not the worst thing I've seen in the world. And I do truly believe that Downpour is the most sincere effort that this development team has made to try and restore the series back to its former glory. And Downpour definitely does not come close to older titles, but I would say that Downpour is a very good step in the right direction. There's always room for improvement there though, but I'm really looking forward to see what the next Silent Hill title is going to look like, because if it's half as decent as this game, I know we're going in the right direction, but please, just give the game back to Konami, please, give it back to Team Silent, please. I just want what I want, and I never get what I want. So that was my review for Downpour. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully I didn't rant on too long. I tried being as fair as possible in this review. Let me know how you guys felt about the game as well. Did you guys like it? Did you hate it? Do you think this is the end of Silent Hill? Do you think this is the point of no return? Discuss. Comment section. Let me know how you feel. I shall definitely see you 2014. This will be the last video I'm doing for the year. So hope you guys stay safe over the Christmas holidays. Have a great New Year's, and I shall see you in 2014. Thanks for watching, guys.